Hi, everybody. It's Alex Jarett with Technology Executives Club, another edition of Technology Executives Review. And this is a Board of Advisor initial interview. And I'm really pleased to introduce you my good friend and one of our newest Board of Advisors, Michel Langlois. Hi, Michel.
Hi, you did it well.
I
Good.
I guess we'll tell everybody your secret. For like a minute, we were going back and forth, and I got his name right finally. So we appreciate that. Appreciate the tutoring and the coaching. And I got to tell you, your background is so impressive. He's the former CTO at Calix, and previous to that, he was the CTO, Senior VP of Junis Software. That's Juniper Networks, by the way, which is huge, and did a long run with Cisco. Everybody knows Cisco, and really, I think at that time you told me you had a couple thousand people working for. I mean, you've had big teams, Silicon Valley, the real experience, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's great. He's so calm about it. So today we just want to learn a little more about you, and you've had such a career, and you've learned a lot along the way. And if you could just share with us as we go through each of the big ones, kind of what your lessons learned are, then we'll kind of just wrap it up. And we're so, by the way, grateful to have you involved. What I like to do is, by the way, everybody, if you see me looking over here, it's because I'm looking at Michel's LinkedIn profile and just kind of going through it. And then I've got some notes here. So forgive me for that for a second. Anyways, your education, I'm always impressed with, I always like to look at people's core education. And I can see you were at the University of Disruptive, which, and you were an electrical engineer.
Yeah,
right? So you were trained
at that time. There was no computer, so they have to call us something. So yeah, I mean, I'm from Quebec, so you can imagine electrical engineer at the time was more around go build, a dam, get the water, turning the turbine, and basically power the country. That was the destiny, if you want, at the time. But that's not what I wanted to do. So
it's still pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's still pretty cool. I mean, to be able to give power to the country.
Yeah.
So, that's pretty cool. So you did that. You actually were at a lot of different companies. I'm looking at your thing. You had a lot of different, I'll just blow through this. You were Bell Northern Research, and then you were a technical leader, another Concertel, and then Lions Gateway. So it looks like you were moving up the chain, not the chain. You went from staff member to leader to technical manager to R&D director. And you did that, about 5 or 6 years. So it looks like you got that core foundation. I see this a lot. People get that core foundation, then all of a sudden they're bumped up to management, and then they start to rise. And that it looked like that happened to you. And before you jumped into Cisco, you were at a company called Icon or Econ. How do you say that? EICON?
Icon.
Yeah.
Icon Technology.
Real quick, you came in as a manager, and then you became a director and R&D manager, and so you clearly were in the core of their technology. What they do?
So go back a little bit, 30 plus year. The internet is not there at the time. There's something called a mainframe and distributed computing, client server that are starting with IBM.
I remember that. Yeah.
If you do that, and when the PC came, or the server connecting, they were connecting through X25 or ISDN, or essentially some kind of data packet network, if you want.
Yeah.
And the company I was at the time was essentially building a line card that you would put on a server.
Oh, yeah.
In a closet, and basically would connect you to those networks.
That makes sense.
And the technology wasn't that fast at the time. The bandwidth wasn't there, but that was the only way to communicate. And to some extent, what's interesting is you were connecting across company, but there was no internet to connect. There was maybe a built-on board that was emerging.
You were going through the wiring that was already there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was the beginning, essentially, of doing device connectivity, if you want. And what's happened over there is I saw technology shifting from what we call a gateway to something else. And there was a little bit of, at the time, the company I was around 250 million in revenue. Yeah. As a leader in connectivity of the home PC or the business PC.
That's big. That's very big for selling these little cards, right?
Yeah.
I remember, believe me, I remember when I
We
remember
were
when the
selling
PCs
those
came out.
things, and
Yeah.
to your point, you were selling not only that, but you have to speak internally to the network. So we had to do DECnet, Apple Talk,
Yeah.
Novell, Banyan, every protocol around the
God,
sun.
that takes me
And all
back.
those companies died after that, which is
Yeah,
also funny when
just
you
hearing
think
you
about
say
it.
that takes me back because I was around then too.
So what's happened in one point of time, I was looking at the next generation of product, and I heard about something called routing, and I was like, oh, that looks more interesting. Now you can not just connect to X25, you can connect across company. Why don't
the
we try to
routers.
get that technology
Oh,
called routing?
yeah.
So I went to a show, and the idea was like, look, I'm going to meet people that sell router. And at the
What was it
time, it
like?
was
Comdex or
just,
something like that?
yeah. And I went to, what was this, the show? It was one of the telecom show in Vegas.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
And we went there and we met with a company called Cisco, which was at the time was starting to be one of the Silicon Valley emerging routing company, but there was many, by the way.
Yeah.
And when I met with them, I remember I say, look, guys, we kind of the same size, but we're in Canada. Why don't we do a partnership? Or if you don't
Oh,
want to do a partnership, why don't OEM your code? And they start giggling in the room. I remember those execs. They're like, it's not gonna happen. And I say why? Well, it's not because we don't like you. It's just like we can barely manage our own code ourselves. So nobody can figure out how to make it portable or give it to somebody else. And I remember leaving the meeting. I said, well, if you're that in trouble, why don't you call me one day? I'll go fix your toy. And we left the meeting.
you said that to them?
Yeah.
I
I'm
love
French
that.
Canadian. You see it the way it is.
You have to tell me about this part of the world when I come out and we have a beer or two.
Yeah,
So go
exactly.
ahead.
But the funny
Yeah.
thing after that is it went from air cricket for 3-4 months, and then I got a call from
Yeah.
Cisco that say, hey, we remember you. Would you like to come and see what we do? And maybe there's a fit for you,
Yeah.
you and your family to come. And short story, that's how I end up at Cisco. And I end up essentially in the software team, which was, look, the company at the time was maybe 600 million, but we had like 300 engineers. And most of them were essentially hardware people because they were building the system and the hardware and the line card and all of this. And the software was called iOS. And by the way, this is not the iOS in your watch. It's not the iOS on your desktop.
Yeah.
It's the Internet Network Operating System. And we had a trademark war essentially with Steve Jobs at one point of time when we were bigger. But anyway, iOS was what I was given the opportunity to basically to lead in the kernel team. And it was an interesting team because they were essentially engineered that have never been managed. They were like, why do we need a manager? And I remember telling them, well, I'll make a deal with you. If you allow me to explain to people what you're doing, in exchange of this, you'll have the peace to do it. And I will shield you from all the politics and the gimmick and the budget. And that's how I end up essentially be accepted by that team.
So you solved a big problem for them is what I'm hearing.
Well, it was interesting because that was a group that was already starting to look into, wow, we built this thing called an IP router, but it's only good for data and it's best for, we don't guarantee anything. If it fails, we'll retransmit everything. And right away, the company was like, oh, there's routing, but it's kind of expensive to connect a campus to router.
Yeah.
There was this new technology called switching, and then everybody went crazy about switching. They say, oh my God, that thing is going to kill routing. There's no place for both. And that's where right at the time I show up. So essentially the company as doing well, go from 0 to 600 million within 4 years. Switching is coming, stocks falling because Cisco didn't have routing, switching technology.
So, because I wasn't really watching all this. So they had the routing, switching shows up.
Yeah.
And they had already gone from 0 to 600 million in a very short period of time. So I can only imagine what that feels like. Just total cluster, craziness as you grow that fast. And so now all of a sudden they start to go on a free fall.
Yeah.
Is that exaggerating? They go into a
fall? No. It was like that because the stock has already did by 25%.
Okay.
There was already analysts and pressure from the investor that say, hey guys, if you don't make a move, it's over, which was
because things can happen really fast because all the stuff that we all take for granted now was being built back then. Yeah. Just like there's a shift going on right now with AI and everything else, there was a shift.
Yeah. And the funny thing is at the time, in good insight, we decided to acquire a company called Calpana, which became the catalyst switch, which kind of dominate the industry for a long time, in fact, at Cisco. But it was the beginning for me. I learned one thing, is if you innovate, you better not have technology religion. Because if you get stuck in your religion, eventually technology come and go. Doesn't mean that your core value is not the same. It's just like you can be disrupted by somebody else, by a technology, by a market shift, and then you're left behind. And that's probably what's happened to most of the company in networking. When you think about it, there's a graveyard of hundreds of companies that had full funding and were doing well. And I mean, think about it 30 years ago. If you would have told me that 3Com, after inventing the internet, disappear, well, I've never believed you. I mean, they were everywhere, if you want.
Well, we've talked about this before. It's like the classic Clayton Christensen innovator's dilemma, where you go up and the whole company is now based upon selling that thing. So you got the guy in the back room say, hey, what about this? Let's do this. This is super cool or something, some scenario. Or somebody else that's in a different company is developing it and they don't have that revenue stream. They don't have the pressure from the sales team. They don't have all that. And they come up with it and they could even bring it to you and say, hey, you sell it. Everybody's watching this has read that book or talked about this very topic, but you actually helped them solve the problem. So in this situation, am I hearing that you helped them bring the switch?
Well, it was interesting. I think what's happened is when we built Calpana, it's the first acquisition of any major level by Cisco. There was two schools of thought. Do we take the technology that they invented and just essentially put it over iOS and our hardware and repaint the box and call it a switch? I mean, you could do integration like that. There was another.
Sounds like client server. Sorry, go ahead.
Or there was more a debate to say if the technology is still in early stage of adoption. And clearly, it's like there's momentum. Yeah. It's like AI. Everybody talk about it.
It's all AI.
The business case are not completely done, and the ROI is not there. So we decided more to say, leave them alone, because by the way, with the router, we have a new idea. It's not just going to be your IP is one of the ways to connect legacy network, if you want. We're going to essentially try to make IP capable to carry all type of traffic. So suddenly the missions start to change to say, oh, what do you mean all type of traffic? Well, I mean voice. And again, if you go back 30 years ago, voice was a separate network called a TDM. And the voice network, nobody could connect to that thing other than a phone, which was the size of, of a laptop, if you want. So basically, we had to realize that we're going to have to invent new protocol that were never designed to do what just IP is capable to do. Mm-hmm. So suddenly, the mission of my group and the entire team of iOS was extend the internet protocol to do the sum of all. Because the vision was eventually you're going to do data, you're going to do guarantee services. So you won't need any more circuit-based X25 or any one of those TDM network point-to-point circuit connection. And then eventually was like, if we can carry voice in a deterministic way, because you cannot, you have to meet a budget of transmission, so otherwise you cannot speak. Mm-hmm. Then the next step was eventually, what about content? Can we do video? And all of this thing didn't exist at the time that we joined at Cisco. So the funny thing was, we saw a mission that was essentially extended. We also had to agree on standard because we realized that, wait a minute, all those companies die. Why did they die? Because they were proprietary. It was, you buy IBM, you have to buy IBM, everything. You have to buy DECnet, you have to buy AppleTalk, Novell, etc. We said, if we leave it like that, we're going to have the same thing. So we decided to go to standard, but because we were an internet-based company, we didn't go to ITU, we didn't go to IEEE. We went into a new forum called IETF, which was the internet steering group, if you want. And we say, let's go invent a bunch of protocol there.
Okay, so big picture, what I'm hearing, because you're throwing a bunch of acronyms. I don't know all of them, but I know a bunch of them. So, what I'm hearing is Cisco takes off, then they have a problem, the switching thing comes out. You help them acquire something, another group, and then package it up. So now you got switching and you solve that problem. But then you kept going and you said, let's really solve the problem is what I'm hearing.
Well, the reality was, think a little bit about it. You're 600 million.
Yeah.
You had the switching, you're $1 billion. And at the time.
And you stopped for the free fall. You stopped the free fall.
No, not there. Because you go from $1 billion to say, if the internet protocol can carry everything and eliminate all the old network, we're going to swallow all this traffic. So think about it. Now, suddenly the addressable market is everything and everything across the world. So for us, it was more around, okay, how are we going to get there? And the joke was always, do the maths. If you're $1 billion and you have to grow 10% a year as an expectation, how are we going to find 100 more million?
So you really were in an innovate or die situation. Everybody outside was probably thinking, oh my God, it's so great, $1 billion company. But you were all thinking, how are we going to sustain this?
Well, it was a few things. It was sustaining, but it was also like, how much can we do in an organic way, hiring people and the smart? How much can we do through acquisition? How much can we inject money in the VCs and the incubator to say, if there's something cool that comes, we have the first right of refusal.
Yeah.
And when I say this, it's not like to say, I drove all of that thing. I was part of the core team of maybe 10, 15 people that we got so used to grow.
Yeah.
And we had so much capacity to invest. I used to joke, my first 10 years at Cisco, I never had a budget. I was spending. There was no limit.
Oh my God, that must have been so much fun.
Yeah, I'll give you an example.
If I would have loved to have been a sales rep there, man.
The toward the end.
Don't tell me. I'll get upset. So go ahead.
So you're growing like that, and then the reality was, if acquisition become part of the strategy, how the hell are we going to integrate all those technology and people that come from different culture, different ways to think? And that's why we started to realize that the only way you can scale is to start to unify a bunch of processes if you want. So we decided that every company that comes, or every time we grow, there's one IT team. There's not going to be 20 IT teams that don't want to change. Manufacturing will be centralized. The common software will be centralized. Sale will be one sales channel. I mean, it could be enterprise, could be service provider or consumer, but you're not going to have 20 flavor of the company. And that was a big decision because we could have decided to do like GE, buy a bunch of company from light bulb to nuclear reactor, give them a logo, have Jack Welch telling everybody how to run the business, but they have nothing in common. And we saw company going that path and we say, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to try to be one company, one logo. And despite there's difference, and there was difference also into how you sell in US versus Europe versus Asia. So all of these things happened kind of the same time where, the 1 billion that we spoke about
Yeah.
10 years after, went from 94 to 2002 to maybe 50 billion. And the joke was like, if you would have invested into Cisco in 92 and wait to sell your $1 stock that you bought, it would have been worth $45,000. It's the amount of time it split and created value for shareholder.
Mm-hmm.
That's a nice story, but like everything, there was a gravity space. So imagine you go from startup, you become a market leader, you become an incumbent, you're at the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And then things start to be really hard, because if you go around 40, $50 billion revenue, growing 10% is a 5 billion thing.
Yeah. How do you?
5 billion at the time was, we have to grow like acquiring a Nike as a company every year.
You have to, you can't.
You can't.
So, you can't do that. So there is a cap.
There was a cap if you were just trying to be product. There was a big debate to say, should we do like IBM, where they went to the top of the product food chain and then decided to go to services and consulting. There's a big debate there. Yeah.
And what did they do?
They abandoned the product and went totally to service and consulting.
Did that work?
But their revenue went from 50 to 100 billion plus.
So it worked. From
it
that
works
standpoint.
for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
But for us at the time, we didn't want to do that. We said, look, if we invade another channel, we know nothing about it.
Yeah.
We're going to alienate everybody that sell our equipment. So that's why we
see. Yeah.
So we say, forget it.
So
but that was the time where you have to deal with the fact that you're not afraid to grow. You're not afraid to double the size of your
insight.
team.
That's an interesting insight. You have a growth mindset.
Yeah. And there was a safety in knowing that we also had money in the bank. So there's something to take a bet where you're like on a string and with your bar to try to stay up. If you fail, there was enough portfolio that you could basically compensate for a failure in another place of the world or another part of the portfolio.
Yeah. So
interesting time.
Great time. Great story. So let's close out Cisco real quick, but big lessons learned. I heard a couple of them. I like this one about mindset. I also heard don't fall in love with your technology. What are the other big lessons that you take away from that situation from Cisco? Any just one-liners, if you can.
So one of the liner will be dream big, have a purpose for the next 5 years.
Yeah. Oh, that's your growth mentality.
About it. If your goal was to connect everything in the world, interconnect the world, what do you do when you get it? Well, you need another goal. So when we went there, we started from IP. We say every 5 years, if you follow Cisco, there was a new big mission. From IP to all type of traffic will be over IP to you will connect not only everything inside the campus, but you could work from home. There was the beginning of branch office, campus, connectivity to the home. Mobile IP was the next frontier. Then we say, well, if you want to guarantee traffic. So every 5 years, we were used to, by John Chambers and top leader, to say, here's the new mission and engineering, go figure out how to do it.
Oh, I got you.
Literally
so keep coming up. You're saying, when you get to your level, keep coming up with these bigger missions and don't be afraid of growth and go for it.
Yeah.
And come up with a way
to
go for it.
And you were getting the budget, and it was more a question to say, you're going to try to build it yourself, acquire a technology, or find a partner to get there. But the funny thing was also like, you're going to be funded for success, and you have to be the first. And if we establish ourselves as the first in that space, we'll grow the market, we'll be patient, and then ultimately you keep adding to the revenue pool if you want.
Yeah. So I know that at Cisco, there's one more story you want to share about when the internet shows up, right? And how things change. So go ahead and share that story.
So think about it. I just described the boom day. These were like crazy growth.
Yeah.
We had the doomsday after that. What's the doomsday? A lot of the value, the perceived value of the company was you were enabling the web, the .com. And if you remember, the .com was around this idea that you can commercialize anything from any place in the world and have a global market to you. And the valuation of a .com company was absolutely crazy. But we were tied to it because we were the engine of infrastructure for that. So in 2002, I remember that the bubble exploded. Within 6 months, this whole market disappeared.
I remember that too.
So to the point that if you were .com, you don't want to have any discussion in the public space about who you work for, because people are mad at you. But ultimately, what's happened for Cisco is the revenue went from 52 billion or close to less than 20 billion within 6 months.
Jeez.
The perfect storm. We never seen this like that. So we had essentially to contract the company. We had to do layoff. We have never done a layoff. We had to decide what's going to survive in the company, which business. And it was so funny because we had so many bets everywhere that when somebody say, okay, what's the prospect you're going to hit big within 6 to 9 months because we have to triage what we're going to keep and let go. There was a lot of those bets were like, never going to make it. But we had a chip on the table.
How did the company solve that? And what's the big lesson there?
Well, the big lesson was two things. When the whole market fell down, we were probably one of the companies the most advanced from data insight. We could collect everything about how much we sold today per the minute, per the hour, per theater, per everything. So we could slice our business in anything real time. Where most of the people at the time will take a month to figure out where they are.
So you were truly agile because of your ability to look at the data of what's actually going on.
And the problem, and I remember being asked, how the hell did we didn't see this thing going? It's because the data, we have never seen a trend like that. So what I learned with data, and the same thing with AI, it's a rear view of something.
Yeah.
It modelizes the trends. It does projection. But if he goes in a place that's never been seen, you have two choices. You can react right away, but you're like, wait a minute, I'm the first one that's seen this blip. Is that really a blip or is it me? And by the time we start correlating that it wasn't a blip, everybody was panicking, dumping everything around us. All the budget were gone, all the spending were frozen. And so what I learned is be careful that data doesn't modelize the new. And if you're being successful, you're going to be in denial anyway. Doesn't matter that you see the data, you don't want to believe it.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Come on, we're doing great. That kind of thing.
Yeah, we're going to come back. We always come back. It's just a blip. So the third thing I learned after that was if your business goes down, how are you going to basically rebuild it? And that was the journey. I stayed another 6 to 7 years to try to go from the 20 billion with the team and try to bring back the business. And that was much harder, by the way, because we didn't have any more an ability to acquire company because the stock was in the toilet. I couldn't just go and say, hey, Alex, why don't you work for me and I'll throw tons of stock and money and you won't have to work anymore in a few years. These were gone now. We had to compete for value. We have to motivate people. We had a set of investors that were really pissed at us. And there was a lot of companies that say, you know what, you're too expensive now for me. Maybe I'll bring somebody else. These were tough times.
So two questions, two things. One is for the edit camera. And two is, how did you solve it? Tell us how you solved it and what's the lesson?
So we went back into the core business. Ultimately, what we realized is independently of the usage was, or the driver was the .com. First, we realized that stop believe there's something like a killer apps. We made the bet ourselves. We'll never believe anymore in the killer apps to generate the market. So then we went back into, you're still going to have to connect. At the time, PC were moving into laptop, we're moving into mobile device. we say, wait a minute, there's billion of those things to connect.
Yeah.
Why don't we start to get into the IoT business, or at the time we used to call it the Internet of Things?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And I say, if we go and create an adjacent market for our core business, which is still routing and switching and security, eventually they'll come back. That was the bet. But what we couldn't basically figure out is what to do with the valuation of the company, because it takes a while for people to forget after you lose so much valuation and money and shareholder value.
So you strategically went after a new market you knew was coming.
Yeah.
And you made that bet and you did it.
Yeah.
Correct?
And we refocus everybody from externally to that wasn't in core business back into the core business. Because we said, look, there will be less and less people entering the connectivity market. Let's make sure that we dominate that space. We have the funding to do the new.
Gotcha.
And in one way, what was also interesting, it was also the beginning of security as a business.
Yeah.
Network were being hacked. So suddenly we're like, wow, it's not just connecting everything. You have to make it secure.
Protecting. Yeah.
Yeah. So it started to generate different business. But look, it took 25 years almost for Cisco to go back to the run rate of it was before the bubble.
Yeah.
So my only point is you cannot flip that.
To Cisco, to you and the team and Cisco's credit, they survived it and came back, which a lot of companies don't do it. But those are great lessons.
But also we make us a little bit more like manager.
Yeah.
And learning how to motivate people, learning how to understand the stress, because none of these things was our focus, to be honest. Like, if you want to work there,
before you were riding the big tidal wave.
Yeah.
And you were one of the top guys on the surfboard. And then the wave went away and you're like, oh my God, I got a paddle.
So there's no wave and there's no wind and there's nothing on the water.
You're out there in I got to get back. Yeah. That's a good metaphor. That's what happened. But you figured it out. All right, let's jump. Let's go to, because we still got to, my gosh, the time's flying. So let's jump. Tell us, Juniper, tell us the story there. What was the challenge and what did you do and what was sort of the big lesson?
So Juniper came after I was 15 years in the company.
Yeah.
I felt at the time that I've done what I wanted to do at Cisco. I built iOS. I helped the people to make it more extensible. There was thousands of people working on this thing. And then one point of time, I realized that, wow, the company is morphing to a point that networking is kind of being pushed a little bit on the side toward consumer and other things. And that's where I felt I got the call out in my head to say, maybe it's time to go. The question was, where did I want it to go? Well, I was supposed to go to a storage company because I wanted to do something new. I left on a Thursday, and in the afternoon, I got a call from Juniper to say, hey, there's a rumor you're gone. Would you like to talk to us? And I'm like, so in case you don't know, Juniper was the nemesis of Cisco. It was the only company that went into the core business and took market share. So it was extremely personal to go there. And the only reason I went there is because they had a new CEO. His name was Kevin Johnson, and he was a guy that has built Microsoft. And I used to bump head with Microsoft all the time about where the intelligence is going to reside between the client and the server or the network. And my view was the network will be intelligent. You will be just connected to it. Didn't like that, really, that vision, to be honest. But look, I went to Juniper under the premises that we're going to disrupt the entire business. We're going to make essentially the network as a platform, and we're going to invite innovation over it, as opposed to we're going to build every system by ourselves. Mm. And that was the premises that got me there. And when I went there, I realized that, the Juniper that I thought was on the top of the world, the Ferrari of all the car, and I want to build a faster this, has kind of lost a little bit the recipe.
Yeah.
To make a short story, it turned out that the first 2 to 3 years were about rebuilding everything. the foundation, the scale, the tool, simply because the team that has built the Ferrari didn't leave any knowledge to do anything else than that car. So we had essentially to fast forward the company to new technique, new approach, new ways to design. And that was interesting because for a third of the employee of Juniper, it was like, I'm Darth Vader. I can't believe this guy. The nemesis of the company, the Cisco guy, is going to come to tell us what to do. And and I have to give credit to the founder.
Darth Vader shows up.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm 5'8", by the way.
Yeah.
I'm a small Darth Vader when you think about it. But what the founder basically broke the ice with the people. He said, look, we're bringing Michel in the company because first he made all the mistake in the world. He crashed all the network in the world. And by the way, he cannot do worse here than what he did over there. So
that's how he introduces you. That's great.
That was my introduction from the founder of the company. I was like, oh dear. But ultimately it was interesting because it took 3 years to rebuild everything. And the goal was to say, over 3 years, we're going to triple the productivity of the team. We're going to increase by 3 times the product quality. And we're going to reduce the time to ship, to build, to assemble by 3 times. That was the goal, and we did it. And then I stayed another 2 years to figure out, is the recipe last? Or was it just a brute force that got us there? So essentially for me was like, once you get the new kitchen and you're cooking the first meal, it's great. But are you capable to continue to cook and add more now that you're not going to be the one steering it one day? Mm-hmm. And that was what I learned. And that was my 5 years at Juniper, essentially.
That's interesting. So you helped them, you rebuilt, you went in thinking it would be the new sports car or whatever your metaphor was, I forgot.
Yeah.
And it turned out that it was not the new sports car, that you had to build the next version of the sports car.
Well, to your point, it turned out that we had to go back again to what was the differentiation of that company and rebuild the trust of the customer that Ferrari, called Juniper, could be still the best car to buy.
Yeah, so that's a good way of saying it.
Yeah.
So even though it's a mixed metaphor, but we'll go with it.
Whatever.
So anyways, what's very interesting to me is because you're a CTO and I interview a lot of CIOs, you know, a number of CTOs are starting to join. You have such a grasp of the business model and the market in your role, where you're solving problems using technology that it's going to help the company grow, you know, because you're really creating the core products for the company. So that's very interesting, the way that you communicate and the things that you talk about is to me.
And to your point, the one good thing that came out of this is because I wasn't just a product or a business unit or a GM. Yeah. I have to be able to explain the value, what we did across every type of product. So ultimately, the code base that we have at Juniper or Cisco was essentially the mother of all, if you want. It was like supporting 32 line of business or 16. So I got used to explain to say, by using what we did, here's the value you get in routing, switching, security, content, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Because there was nobody that could explain it except the centralized team. Why are you doing what you're doing? What value do I have?
Did you know Steve Jobs and those guys? You probably knew all these guys.
We crossed path with Apple. We crossed path with McNeilus and at Sun. We crossed path with Larry at Oracle. I mean, all of this thing were there. Yeah.
So I find this interesting is that you're the CTO of these major companies, and are you doing the launches, you personally? Are you the one that's like, they do a launch and you're on the stage and demonstrating things and talking to things? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Or was it more you were?
If I look a little bit, when I was the CDO, Chief Development Officer, or the CTO, you have always to position what's the end goal. What did you build these things? And why should I trust we're going to get more value from it? So you were always starting with the statement of direction, the end state, and then eventually bring them back to the product. Otherwise, if you start just with a product demo, okay, you're back to feature and price and things like that. Nobody cares.
That's such a good insight for presenting. Is you're talking about the problem, and then you're helping them visualize the solution of what it's going to feel like.
Yeah, because my job in most of these things
and then you come
wasn't
back
to convince the top engineer. Was to convince management that if they don't do a technology shift or take advantage of a disruption, they will be eventually displaced by somebody else.
Yeah.
So there was always an element that you have to create a little bit of fear. Otherwise, what people will do, especially in networking, if the stuff works in networking, people will like, don't touch it.
Yeah.
Leave it like that for 5 years, and then we'll see if we need an upgrade. And that's a killer for our business. So what we wanted to do is to create momentum, show there's different thing. And what we realized that most of the time, the issue wasn't about the addressable market or the growth. It was our customer, ourselves, that didn't want to change. They were frozen, either by a religion, a technology religion, or frozen in time. And the notion of risk wasn't what they wanted to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, for example, service provider, they used to compete in different places. They never had to compete against each other. So if there's no fear, you kind of a monopoly wherever you are. And I'm saying this because in Chicago, where you live, let me ask you, how many providers provide broadband where you are? You get a cable one, you get a
I don't even think
one.
about it. I mean, I have friends that have done. I mean, I just go to Xfinity and just say, I don't want to mess with it.
Yeah. So basically, if that's all you go with, I go with a brand association. That doesn't mean you have the best technology. That doesn't mean you have the best experience.
I do have a Verizon box, one of those boxes. But I remember when I had an office. I used to have an office with a number of people, and I had the switch because remember when it was I forget what they called it. I had when you buy the internet, but then you go to AT&T and you get I forget what they called it. So I had a switch in case the whole thing went down, and I had backup.
Yeah.
So. Well, okay. Well, that's anything else that you want to talk about at Juniper, because that seems like an interesting experience. Because I want to touch on what you've been doing at Calix.
Yeah, and I think that what the thing is, the Juniper was more around a transformation around processes and people and structure and introducing partnership and all those things. I mean, to some extent, use recipe from the past, but scale it to the size of the company.
Oh,
the Calix was a completely different transformation, if you want.
Tell us about that. Tell us about
Calix,
the Calix
in
story.
case you don't even know, the founder of Calix was a guy that we had bought his company at Cisco just before the bubble exploded. He was selling essentially fiber technology for the super fastest network in the world. So that's why we bought it to essentially scale the internet. He got acquired for almost $8 billion. And then instead of just retiring, he decided to, hey, why don't I reuse the technology in a place where people had never seen the benefits? And he went into broadband or access network, if you want. And at the time, the only thing you could get from access was a cable modem, if you want, or copper. It was copper or DSL. And he comes and he has this passion to say, one day fiber will be connected to the home. I believe in it, which basically made him like an heretic from the market because nobody believed that you needed fiber and nobody believed you could afford fiber anyway. So for 10 years, he invested in this technology. He had to make a living, so he sold the whole stuff, the cable and the DSL. And then 10 years after, he saw that, to some extent, hardware company that builds system will be completely commoditized with white box or common silicon, if you want. So if you cannot sell anymore, you're the fastest. What do you sell? You sell value. You sell service, you sell this. And his vision was around, where the services will be consumed. Not on your laptop, but starting from your device. So his vision was, look, I gave him credit 10 years ago. I went through all the slide when I show up there. It was one day every device will be connected to the cloud through a fiber. That was the vision.
Mm.
Now, the challenge was we had products there that were already 10 to 15 years old. So none of them were capable to execute that vision. So we have to build everything. And it was interesting because I have no constraint. I mean, I have like, go reinvent the product portfolio. You know the end state, device connected over fiber, and go build what we need. And let's not make the mistake to rebuild the same product that we did with that. We were
Wow.
essentially pushing the envelope. And look, the one thing I give credit to Carl, his name is Carl Russo, was that he was the largest shareholder of the company. He had a passion and a vision, couldn't care about the market. Any other CEO would have been fired for not just trying the revenue and the incremental stuff. Because you have to remember, he has to find the money as a public company to fund a new portfolio that doesn't exist. There's not even a customer that believes maybe you need fiber or you need more than 300 meg.
So he gave you this vision.
Yep, that was the end state. And
Yeah.
then he said, your game now, it's a little bit like Cisco. You know where I want to land, do reverse engineer and go from where we are to this.
That is such a, I mean, I see the trend. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're at Cisco. I'm just going to summarize real quick. You're at Cisco. You guys went up, went down a couple times, and then there was a big down. And then you saw the end state and you rebuilt. And that was, and you did it. And then you jump. Now we're going to jump back to here. Same thing where he's like, I got this thing going, but I know that this is the future. Build that.
Yeah. And after that was more a matter to say, how are we going to do it? What's the limitation of the company? What's the talent pool? Because what people don't get is when an end state is so different than what you sell today, is you have to ask yourself, do you have the people to get there? So for example, if we talk about AI, I mean, if you go and you say, well, you know how to write C code, how hard could it be to write AI? That doesn't mean you're going to get there just because you know a language.
That's so funny.
So a lot of the thing we had to look into was, do we have the talent pool? Do we have enough partner to get us there? Do we have early adopter to jump with us to say there's a better ways to do this, a better mousetrap? And once you have that, it was a question to say, how do you bring it to a sales organization that don't want to take the risk? Because that's usually another problem. If your customer are risk adverse, and if your sales force knows for decade of relationship how to run the business, don't go to them to say, hey, I created this new thing, like, I don't know, it's floating in the air, autonomous vehicle, when they don't want to hear about it. So you have to learn a little bit to say, how you do innovation, to capture the market, to excite the imagination, to show things can be done, or to change the economics. So Calix was interesting because it was a product transformation. It was a business transformation. We were telling the service provider they have to change. We had to change also the distribution, the channel, and everything. And ultimately, the company did well. And unfortunately, part of the success was because of COVID and the working from home, and everybody, 5 years ago realized that if your internet is really slow, things are not good if you want, because you were completely dependent on it now. And you were sharing that with everybody in your household. So
what's amazing, I mean, the stories that you have probably are, I'm going to say you could probably write a book about it, but you are, and everybody, and we're going to talk about the book. We're going to talk about that in a second for everybody. The stories that you have are so interesting because you really were involved in solving the innovator's dilemma multiple times. These companies, I just listened to you talk about, when you're building this new thing, you don't have the budget, you don't have all this stuff. That's exactly what I've read about and talked to so many people about. You did it multiple times. So you got a lot. So let's go over some of these lessons learned that you gave me, and just let's make sure we cover them because we're running out of time. I want to get to that and then talk about the book. Is there is there anything else you want me to? Is there
Well,
anything else you want me to talk about?
You were talking about the innovator dilemma. I think what I learned is if you want to carry innovation, you have to understand where is the company in the cycle of startup to grow, to establish market leader, to become an incumbent, to become stagnant also on a decline. Because depending of your insertion point in a company, you cannot use the same recipe if you want.
Yeah.
You're not going to face the same challenge. You're going to face things. So what I learned was I have to change my playbook depending where I land, if you want. But the thing you were kind of, latching on was that it was always, if I can get the end goal vision or an agreement about where we want to land, it's like, I mean, I had a team member on my team that was a climber.
Yeah.
He was a climber. He was telling me, look, I climb right away at the top of the tree to see where's the mountain. If I can visualize the mountain, I know I'm going to have to end up there. The color, the look, and everything.
Yeah.
If you try to go to the mountain just going through the forest, you're never going to get there because you'll be distracted by the squirrel or whatever you are. So it was always like land a big goal, do step where you know where you are toward your journey, and don't change your strategy every time that you hit something. Stick to the plan if you want. That's what I learned. I mean, the rest is more around, assess the talent, assess the local pool, assess the global pool. And on the culture side, I mean, if people believe in the mission, which is, by the way, way better than simply you're going to make money. Think about the mission that I was giving the option to drive was like, we're going to connect the world. We're going to connect everything around it. You're going to do work, life, and play around it. Now it became like the broadband is going to eliminate the digital divide because they have access to technology and cost point that was only reserved to people living in Chicago, for example.
Yeah.
It's if you can have a mission bigger than life and it impact the community and impact your children, everything become a purpose, a sense of value, a quest, a mission. Then the question after that is, make sure that you don't kill yourself in the process.
Yeah. Back to your mountain metaphor, right? So, man, there's so many great insights. So let's talk about the book.
Well, the book came from.
Well, what's the name of it first? Can you share that?
And not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
I haven't completely finished everything.
I thought I could get you to say
the book was about
ahead.
two things. There's a part of the book which kind of synthesized what we just talked about. A little bit the story of innovation in three companies that, despite their size difference, had common attribute. So you share the attribute.
Yeah.
After that, what I really wanted to do was to say, when I went from technical lead to director, kind of easy. If you're technical lead to director, you're still a smart person, but you're managing a little bit more stuff, if you want.
Yeah.
When you go from director, senior director to VP, what changed? Nobody ever told me the difference or what I need to do different. And if you go from VP to SVP, there's a big change. Because an SVP has to do portfolio management, has to understand the market, has to do how do you protect the business but expand, and what are the choice between do it yourself, partner, acquire, blah, blah, blah. If after that you go to the CXO level, it's a different ways to drive what you do. So I have nobody telling me any of these things. And I say, you know what? Every time I read something, it's about leadership, how to be a better leader, how to inspire people, how to become a CEO, how to change the world. That wasn't me. I mean, I wanted to say, look, you keep asking me, how do I get there? I'm going to write it down. And it's just something as a reference. Maybe one day it will be useful for people. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing I wanted to write it was simply, part was a legacy in one way.
Yeah.
Because coming from a chicken farm to a Fortune 500, it's not like I had a pedigree to say I'm going to aspire to be that. but I was given the chance in Silicon Valley to live the big dream. So I'm thankful for that. I wanted to have the people to say it can be done, but ultimately it's about what's your goal and aspiration. So that's where I am right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I got to tell you, it's been I've learned so much listening to you. You have all these different stories. I can't wait to get the book. So when you get the book, let's do a segment on that.
Yeah,
on the book itself.
And look, about the book, one thing which is hard as an engineer, I'm an introvert, by the way. I don't like to talk about the stuff I did.
I wouldn't know it from listening to
you. But at the end, I realize I have a vision of something to say.
Yeah.
I'm using a lot in the book because that was the way I live it. Doesn't mean it was the right thing. We made tons of mistakes with.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a book about chaos and how you make sure you don't burn the engineering kitchen.
Not only surviving but thriving in chaos.
Yeah, and that's the thing I want is like there's so many myths about Silicon Valley, about how do you get there.
And you were there. You were actually in it, doing it.
Yeah, and that was fun. And look, I met bigger than life. I mean, anybody that's seen the Steve Jobs in action or those people, that's not my class. I'm not saying any of this thing.
No.
But when you see somebody
right
that but you can learn. You can see their coaching. You see how they react. You see how they think. And there's something about having that vision of changing.
I love that. You have that vision and you make it a big enough vision so it's worth doing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good way to close on this because you gave us a lot of different insights and a lot of lessons learned throughout today's conversation. But that's a good one. And write it down. Here's what we're going to be. Here's the end state. And then
and go and backwards. Extent, if I take your
what do you call it? Backwards engine. What do you call that phrase?
Reverse engineer.
Reverse engineer. Yeah. And
think about it. Your forum is a platform for me to be able to tell story, to mentor people. Because look, all of this thing was through the eyes of having mentor and coach. And my style was quite different when I started versus where I landed. Because I used to have no tolerance for stupidity and things like that. I kind of learned to put a little bit of water in my wine if you want. But you're a good forum also. I think if you can attract people that wants to learn, and it's a trusted forum when they're not going to be embarrassed and they do this and that. That's giving back to people.
Well, I appreciate that comment. Well, let's close that because I want to thank you for being on the board of advisors and doing segments like this because you really have lived. I'm going to say you've lived the dream in Silicon Valley. You're still doing it. You still got another adventure or two, and we'll be happy to hear about it as it's happening. In the meantime, thank you for today, and thank you for being on our board of advisors.
Bye, folks. Thank you, Alex.
Appreciate you.